Understand what black is. The source from which all things come. The security blanket for the stars. Understand what black is. It's not a color. It's the basis of all colors. It is not a complexion. It is a reflection of all complexions called human. And out of this blackness, passion flows like a river. Feelings tell the truth. Song and dance and making you laugh are family members.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH-LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, everyone. That's from The Last Poets, and some of you may or may not be familiar with The Last Poets, but kind of Google The Last Poets. We know about slams and poetry and the interest in poetry readings. But if you think of Shakespeare, just the poetry's been around with us for a long time. In fact, my guest today, Professor Willie James Jennings, Associate Professor of Systematic Theology and Africana Studies at the Yale Divinity School, also is working on, I believe, a poetry book. But this is a very challenging show for me, but also a very exciting show because the title is After Whiteness, and Professor Jennings is going to kind of expound upon that in terms of his recent book in 2020 that After Whiteness is included in the title. And this is also Black History Month, but when I think of this Black History Month, which, as you know, originally started as Negro History Week, it's 24/7, 365 is a day we can celebrate Black history. And Professor Jennings, years ago when I was with the Inner City newspaper, I used to talk about the African Genesis Month, and some people have talked about this month being Black Resistance Month or Afrofuturism Month. So words and symbols and cognitive archetypes kind of circulate in our mental sphere, but nonetheless, we're going to focus on really, in my mind, and I'm not going to prejudge what Professor Jennings is going to say, but what does it mean to be human? And how do we even define what humanity and she-manity happens to be? Professor Jennings, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's a joy to be with you on this program.
It's good. It's exciting to be with you. I might get a chance to lay eyes on you this afternoon because you're a busy guy. You're moderating an important event this today, I believe, at the Divinity School, correct?
I am. A wonderful panel discussion, bringing back some of our celebrated alums to talk about Black theology and where Black theology has been and where they see it going in the future.
And everyone, that is open to the public, 409 Prospect Street. They'll be in the Niebuhr Hall, the Yale Divinity School. It's also going to be live streamed, so just go to the Yale Divinity School site. Professor Jennings, I looked at you were down in, you're a traveling man. You were down in North Carolina on I guess, on Sunday. You had to be there. When did you leave? Did you leave like just, was it a hit and miss kind of thing, or did you spend some time, or?
No, I had to get in and get out. So I was there Sunday to preach, and then I had to get on back home. Like James Brown, man, I had to hit the next city.
There you go. And you've been on the trail, and your presentation, your sermon, your delivery at the Duke Divinity School, I really enjoy listening to that. I also listened earlier this week. You were at I think it was at the Berkeley, but not Berkeley in terms of California or Boston, but the Berkeley Divinity. There's a panel discussion you were on with two individuals. Like over an hour lecture you were chatting.
Yeah. Where was I?
It was down in Texas somewhere, I believe. And I listened to that, and I also read your book After Whiteness. So I wanted to let people know that although you are the Associate Professor of Systematic Theology and Africana Studies at the Yale Divinity School, your book in 2010, The Christian Imagination, Theology and the Origins of Race, and it won a number of awards. Your discussions of your commentaries on the revolution of the intimate. I'm just trying to share some of the phraseology that you've shared with folks, just to kind of let them know that whether you've read your total books or heard you speak, you're at least capturing from marketing and public relations is so important. So you're capturing people's attention. And then as I mentioned, after whiteness and education and belonging, which is really, I've several times I've continued to read that. And then lastly, unfolding the world, recasting a Christian doctrine of creation. And then this, have you finished this book of poetry, The Time of Possession?
I haven't finished it yet. I'm still, as I say, I'm still nursing some poems there, but I'm hoping to get that done fairly soon.
Great, great. What I wanted to do, because easily people could just go to YouTube and listen to you, so they don't have to listen to me. But I wanted to. So I'm trying to think of a way to more challenge myself as well as our audience, and maybe even challenge you a little bit in terms of the 4 or 5 objections that you've received over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And I use the term receive because even when someone criticizes you or hopefully they haven't thrown tomatoes at you when you've been on stage, but when you've been challenged, I was think of the 4 or 5 times or theses
Mhm.
or pushbacks that people have provided you with as you've
Yeah.
interacted with people. And I'll shut up, but it's just the reason this desire came upon me to ask you to pose this question to you is just seeing how you've interacted with folks that, as far as I'm concerned, I would want to eliminate them from the planet. But and not be caught, in doing it. Uh, but so I've just been intrigued with how you've been able to navigate and respond to outrageous slings and arrows of fortune. So, what are
Mhm.
some of the four what jumps into your mind? And we have about 45 minutes kind of unpack some of these challenges that you have encountered and that you still might be trying to overcome.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but thanks again for bringing me on the show, my friend. It's so great to be with you. You know, the difficulty that I always encounter when I do my work and I do my public speaking with folks is to get them to step into the full possibilities of what it means to live a Christian life. And that's always a challenge. And especially it's a challenge given the racial condition of the Western world, in which Christianity is so deeply woven into that racial condition, so deeply wedded to the reality of whiteness. And so, one of the first crucial points of pushback that I always get are from folks who identify as white, who are deeply, deeply disturbed that I'm actually asking them to think about something called whiteness.
Hmm.
And that's always a challenge for people. They, as I've said many times, the difficulty for so many people in the Western world is that they never got the memo
Hmm.
that whiteness was a creation, or more specifically, a recreation of human existence. And that recreation is precisely what we are still struggling to get people to understand.
Hmm.
That whiteness is not phenotype, it's not biology, it's not culture, and it certainly is not part of God's creation. It is a way of being in the world and a way of seeing the world at the same time and having the power to realize how one imagines the world to be and to function inside that realization. And so, as I say, it's an engine of aspiration, and it has always been in the Western world. And so,
Hmm.
when you point that out to people, what you're saying to them is that there is a way of being in the world that does not operationalize whiteness in all its imperial and oppressive and supremacist ways of being in the world. But the challenge is for them to even admit
Hmm.
that they're inside of it. And so it's one constant struggle. In my many years of teaching, I mean, for many years I taught every year, sometimes every semester, a course on race in the church, race and theology, race and Christianity. And that course was always exhausting
Hmm.
because students pushed back hard. They did not want to imagine that there was an identity that they should inhabit, especially as Christians, that there's an
Hmm.
identity they should inhabit that is different from that racial identity.
Hmm.
And what I tried to explain to them, especially to my white students, and is to explain to them that just as so many people of color have all their life learned how to carve a difference between that horrible, derogatory racial vision of who they are and who they actually are, pulling out the little slivers of truth from the way that derogatory vision has twisted and distorted their historical realities, but trying to pull out those little pieces of truth, clean them up, fix them up, and let them stand as a part of who they are. Just as so many people of color have done that and continue to do that every day. The challenge is now for so many people who have identified as white to do that same work. But here's the problem, Tom. The problem is that if someone has been, and this is the case for so many, if someone has been presented with a form of identity that is always positive, always conducive to advantage, always a facilitator of the removal of obstacles, and is the hard-won achievement of one's ancestors, then why would you want to give that up? And so the difficulty for so many Christians, white Christians, is that, especially in the West and especially in this country, they stand in long legacies of what I call the eradication of their European founding. So they will come and they will, as quickly as possible, and we have a long history of this in this country, people changing their names, people not making sure their children don't speak the old tongue, making sure the children don't know the stories, making sure that the way they dress, the way they look, all of it looks of the new world, the look of America, the look of life in America, the blonding of the hair, the lightening of the skin, everything to move away from that immigrant past. And so for so many people, their great-grandmothers, great-grandfathers would be proud of the fact that their great-grandchildren don't know, nor look like, nor act like the folks of the old world. And so when people do want to reclaim, as many people do today, they do want to reclaim their kind of their past, their European past. At this point, it's inside of an act of recreation, not so much of recreation. But all this comes back to the crucial struggle and the crucial point of resistance I always get as the first one, which is, why are you talking about whiteness so much? Why are you pressing on us in this way?
What is, and that's really so helpful to hear you explain that. Do you also get criticized, or it's a question, when you say that what you just said to somebody in the audience, would someone also then say, Professor Jennings, okay, I agree with you, but how can I evolve or change? Or are you offering me a solution, Professor, or you're just condemning me?
Yeah, and that often is a part of it. And the reality is that most of the time, I begin with the way forward. The difficulty is not that I don't give a way forward. The difficulty is people don't want to take it.
Okay, all right. Tease us.
So the way forward, I'll come back to the example I just gave. So I'll often say to white Christians especially, so I just mentioned to you, your sisters and brothers, your siblings in Christ who are sitting next to you, people of color, who engage in this process of separating the racial derogatory from who they are. So right next to you, sitting right next to you, are people who you should join arm in arm, hand in hand, in doing that, what I call that renunciation of whiteness work. And so the first step is to open your ears, open your hands, listen and learn, and follow the examples all around you of walking away. Now, of course, this is indeed a spiritual matter, and it is indeed a matter of deep spiritual discipline. And it is, as I've said to many people, you have to think of that wonderful passage in the book of Hebrews, where it says that Moses, when he realized who he was a son of Pharaoh. He was in Pharaoh's house. At that moment, Moses chose to identify with the Hebrews, even though he was in Pharaoh's house. he chose to identify with the Hebrews and to stand with them. And in the Hebrews, it says, and in that way, Tom, he was following the Christ. In that way, by choosing to identify with those that were completely removed from the reality of advantage and opportunity he existed inside of in Pharaoh's house. And so that's the first pushback, and the challenge always are to get folks to yield to the work of the Spirit, and get people to open themselves to what God wants to do through them. And that begins by, as I like to say, it begins by a fundamental renunciation of whiteness. And the difficulty, obviously, I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but it's important.
Yeah, sure, yes.
The difficulty is that, again, if you have been shaped inside the implicit advantages that so implicit that you cannot even see them of the reality of being white, then it's a real struggle to want to challenge it. As I always say, think of two hands being held together, and that they are held together so tightly that if you look at one hand and then turn over, look at the other hand, it's like you're looking at the same hand. And the reality of it is that for many Christians, especially, that their whiteness and their Christianity are so woven together that for them to start to try to pull them apart is extremely painful. Because why would they want to do that? So to ask, I want you to pull this apart. I want you to start to see yourself. And it's not just a question of seeing yourself, but to then think about all the ramifications, the political, social, economic ramifications of challenging that way of being in the world. And once we start to put that on the table, my goodness, boy, that's where the struggle is, but that's really where discipleship is.
I certainly want to delve in terms of your theological working in the vineyard, but before I go there, just on a secular standpoint, it seems to me in your travels you've encountered counselors or psychologists or therapists to on the secular professional services side, professional therapy side. Have you encountered any academic disciplines or friends that can help white people evolve away from their heritage and move into humanity? So is there a role for a psychologist or a psychotherapist? But the word cognitive dissonance kind of just keeps on coming back to me. Are you creating so much internal struggle that they're frozen and paralyzed rather than being able to move?
Well, I think that every discipline can be of service in this. And I think not only of the therapeutic intervention, but as I like to talk about, this also has to do with both architectural and geographic intervention. Part of what we're talking about now is the reconfigurations of our habitation and our living. The as I call the rethinking of the reality of dwelling. And so what's necessary is to invite people into a deep consideration as a communal project, not just me at home staring at my mirror, but as a kind of shared project of rethinking the very fabric, the very structure of our daily living. And that's where I'm excited about the work ahead. I don't understand this to be a mountain so high that we can't climb. Because here's what we have to understand about these matters. The racial condition, as we now experience it, it is not like it's not like a building that is standing there impenetrable, immovable, and we have to try to figure a way how to get into it. It is think of it more as an energy being applied against energies for thriving living, right? And what we have to do is we have to turn that energy toward the good, because right now that energy is turned in a way that resists creating new realities of thriving. So that being the case, I think every discipline and every vocation can be enlisted in helping us think through what would a different kind of living look like where the way we dwell starts to crumble from within the structures of whiteness.
Say some more about that if you would, and then perhaps weave in, even at the divinity school. I'm guessing, but I want to get your confirmation that the village, the building, the new building construction is part, strikes me as being part and parcel of that desire that you've just articulated.
Well, this comes down to what so many people see, but don't in many cases understand, that the racial condition tied into racial antagonism, white supremacy, oppression, segregation, all of this is structured into what we call the built environment. And by the built environment, we mean the way communities, neighborhoods, cities, homes, our various zoning reality, how all of this has come to be. And what many people don't understand, Tom, is that long after a group of virulent racists have died, if they have been able to structure neighborhoods and communities, structure patterns of living, flows of life and of traffic and so forth, they can bake into those very structures their own racial antagonism, their own racial hatred. And so when I say to people, in order to start to address whiteness, I don't want you to, first of all, stare into a mirror and look inwardly. I want you to do some of that, but what I also want you to do is look outwardly at the shape of a neighborhood, the shape of how the goods and services flow through communities. I want you to think about the way in which my daily life is structured by my movements, because we are constitutively, we are movement. And so how do we understand that movement, and how does that reinforce the very racial hatred and antagonism that was built into the neighborhood, built into the structure of the community? And how might we rethink it so that the very structure of our living starts to speak against it? So what does this mean? It means the simple things. As you and I know, one of the great engines that sustains racial antagonism, that sustains white supremacy, is the reality of segregation.
Redlining, et cetera.
Yeah, I continue to meet people. I continue to meet people every day who they were raised in almost all white communities, where the only encounter with people different from themselves was a highly controlled encounter, where they were always in control. Now, but here's what we have to ask ourselves. What does it do to a human being's psyche?
Yes.
Be raised in a situation where the only way you encounter difference is under control. What does it mean to be raised in a community where all the questions about life, all the ways in which you've come to understand and see the world have been shaped in a mind-numbing homogeneity, where that is everything that only looks like you, acts like you, but also thinks like you. And so I have met scholars, and they will start talking, and I will realize this person's never been around anybody other than white people. Her entire life. And now we set them, I talk about this after Whiteness, we set them loose, we unleash them in a classroom, a multicultural classroom. And then we ask, why are we having difficulties here? It's precisely because we're looking at people for whom the built environment did them harm. So we do want to involve every discipline. We want to involve everyone who has to live in the world. That is, everyone who lives in a neighborhood, everyone who lives in a house, everyone who lives in a community. This is all our work.
And so when you hear the word gentrification, it means to you what, in terms of its current manifestation?
It means the continuing reflexes of an unthinking white supremacy that's built inside of capitalist, the capitalist imagination.
And
And
mm, mm, mm. It's we have about 20 minutes and I want to kind of cover a few more topics. And
okay,
you've just teased me as you've been teasing people with your academic journey to kind of reconnect with you either through radio or just to read your books, et cetera. And so this is exciting. Spiritual indwelling. You referenced the power, the guideposts that are available by focusing on the spiritual life. Say a little bit more about that, if you would, and maybe even if you're so willing to share a little bit about when perhaps your conversion experience took place, whether you're 10 or 11 or 12, or whether it was a series of episodes. I've had a chance to chat with friends. I graduated from the Divinity School in 1975 with the MDiv, and so although not ordained, and I didn't go to divinity school from a professional standpoint, it was more of a mental kind of journey. But I've had a chance to have a lot of minister friends, black and white, and I've asked them about their when they heard the call, whether they paid the call, whether they're still paying the call, and just curious in terms of when that stimulus kind of injected your spirit.
that's a great question for me. I was always that kid who asked questions. So I grew up in the church, and I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is, if anybody knows the Grand Rapids, Michigan, they would know that it's an extremely theological town. Lots of churches, the home of a denomination, the home of several of the most famous Christian book publishers, Erdman's, Zondervan's, Baker. So I grew up surrounded by Christianity and Christian churches and all the trappings that go along with that. But I was always that kid who questioned everything. And that questioning itself, I later learned that question itself, I think was the Spirit of God drawing me to seek clarity and truth. Even as a very young person, my poor pastor, I think I was the most both beloved and hated child in the church. I was a good kid, but I was the kind of kid that, if you were a minister, you're like, oh God, here he comes again. I have 3 questions for you today, Pastor. And I was, I was precocious and didn't have enough polish to not say, what you just said didn't make any sense. So I would say that. You said didn't make any. So my journey began in questioning. And for me, what it meant was that the deep questions about what it meant to be a Black man in America, what it meant to be Black in America, Black facing what we were facing and are facing, met with the deep questions about who is God, and what does God have to do with my Blackness? What does God have to do with my struggle? And so what drove me forward and what continues to drive me forward is living inside the deep, calling to the deep, as I like to say. The deep problems and the deep questions that people have about their existence and about the configuration of the world, bound to those questions about God, and not only God's existence, but God's actions. What are you doing, God? And to me, all intellectual life, if it comes to life, must live between those 2 realities of inquiry. And
say that again.
So all intellectual life, if it's going to come to life, it's going to truly touch the energies of life, it has to exist between those 2 deep realities of inquiry. What is it about my existence, especially inside of the racial condition, especially inside of a world in which the whole world has been turned into commodity? What does my existence mean? And that all those questions have to be placed inside the other set of questions, between the other set of questions. That is, who is this God? And what is this God doing in the world? And to me, intellectual life is really exciting when you stand between those 2. To stand with just one without the other, to me, is you always, in many ways, undermine, you wash out the depth of intellectual inquiry that's possible, especially in universities. When universities, thankfully I'm at a place that honors that second set of questions, that second reality of inquiry. But when you're in places that don't, you can sense that there is something profoundly, something's missing, a profound absence, a deep hole that should be filled with this other reality. So the spiritual life in that regard, then, for me, always encompasses, always enfolds the intellectual life. And one of the great challenges today in the modern university is to allow for people to allow those two things to touch. The spiritual life and the intellectual life are deeply woven together, and the best kind of life in the academy, and the best kind of life for those who graduate and move forward, is a life in which their intellectual endeavors and whatever vocation they've entered are so deeply woven into their spiritual journey that they cannot be separated and should not be separated.
Excuse me, just as you were ending there, my mind flashed back to your sermon on Sunday, where you use this HOPE word in terms of hope, and Clinton used hope from, I guess, Hope, Arkansas, and Jesse used hope in terms of keep hope alive. So it's been part of our that word, those four letters have been part of our public discourse for so long. Just wonder if you wanted to share a little bit about the Sunday, your sermon on Sunday, because again, the skepticism, this dystopia, this depression, this
I had, and I won't pain your listeners with the recap, but I will say this, that the crucial matter in front of us right now, especially, as I said in my sermon, I'm dealing with a lot of 20-somethings and 30-somethings and 40-somethings, and the crucial matter in front of us now is how to understand and sustain hope, given what we're facing on this planet. And one of the difficulties for so many people, they don't know what the work of hope is. The work of hope is not the work of working up sentiment, a sentimentality, working up feeling. The work of hope is to be disciplined by it, that one lives in it and toward it as both a compass and a friend. And that is the challenge for so many people. Now, I as a Christian, what I had said is that one of the mistakes that we often make is we confuse the work of hope with progress. And what I meant by that is, if someone understands that they are inside a story of progress, with its progression and regression, with its movement forward and its stepping backward, then their hope is calibrated to that progress. So that they are subject to the ups and downs, the ebb and flows of progress and falling backward. But if your hope is grounded in something else, and here it's grounded in God, grounded in what God is doing in the world and what you understand yourself to be doing in relationship to that work, then your hope is not calibrated to whether there's progress or not. Now, of course, we want progress, and we take note of progress. We take notice of it, of achievements and failures. We think through them carefully, but our hope is not calibrated by them. Our hope is not grounded in them. And that's the difference. Hope is a discipline. And for so many people, especially so many young people, this is a lesson they haven't learned. They have not learned that your hope is not tied to ideas of progress based on liberal democracy. Your hope is based in life with God. And that life will sustain you in the midst of the work you must do.
We've in a little bit of the Jesus word, you've referenced the God word. Weave in a little bit about the Jesus word. I've been listening to some of your lectures and reading the book, and the role and the symbolism of the Jesus persona in terms of what you've just mentioned for us to have the fruits of our labor.
Right. That's the whole point, that the reality of a disciplined life and hope is to enter the life of Jesus. That's the crucial matter, that, as I said on Sunday, that a life of hope rooted in his life is one that allows us to participate in the work that Jesus is doing in this world without allowing ourselves to link our hope to progress, to failure and achievement. We want those things. We're fighting for those things. But at the end of the day, the engine that moves us forward is not achievement upon achievement. The engine that moves us forward is the life of Jesus, grounded in his life with God and the hope that is established in and through his life. This, of course, is for so many, we talked about this earlier, for so many people who identify as Christian, this is, of course, a memo that they never got, because many of them have mistaken a story of progress with the story of hope. They've mistaken a story of accomplishment with the life of Jesus. And so they have not gotten the memo that these are not the same thing. And the kind of triumphalism that we are always susceptible to here in this country over what good the country has done and continues to do in the world always makes this even more dangerous, that we lodge our hope in the possibilities of this nation state. And many people have never gotten, as I said, the story that the story we are inside of, those of us who are Christian, the story we are inside of as Christians, not the story of the United States. It's the story of Jesus's life, God incarnate. That's the story we're inside of. And so that means that's how we organize the narrative structure of our lives. It's not the story of not the rise of the United States, not the sustain of the United States, and not the future of the United States. That's not the story, the overarching governing story of our lives. Now, I know for many people, and maybe for some of your listeners, this will sound extremely strange. But this is, in fact, for those who are Christian, this is, in fact, the reality for us. There is that great line in the book of Revelation, which says, in effect, that there will come a day when all nations shall stream into the New Jerusalem, and that that is, in fact, the ultimate goal. That there isn't the eternality of the United States of America. I know for some people, they imagine that, but that's not what we should be imagining.
So when you think of the Ukraine and you think of China and you think of the United States and even Turkey for that matter, what comes to your mind and companion with what you've just said?
The key at this moment is to remind ourselves that in the struggle for between nations, the struggle for national independence, the struggle for sovereignty and for viability, the thing we have to remember as Christians is that at the end of the day, what constitutes our collective life is life as the people of God, not as and you name the nation. And now, of course, what that then means is that the ethic that drives us, the moral vision that drives us, certainly is commensurate with the moral vision that wants to push against the use of violence, that wants to bring peace and end war. But it presses us beyond that to a shared life. Because what do we know about the struggle right now in Ukraine? We know that this is a struggle initiated by a madman who wants control of the resources of Ukraine. We know this, that it is no accident that global food supplies have been profoundly affected by this war. And it's no accident that that president in Russia is clear about what he wants. So we live our life beyond the restrictions and the narrowed vision of a nation thriving. We live inside of a world that thrives and is joined together in common purpose for thriving.
Mm-hmm. I want to shift for a second to theological education and places like the Divinity School and Duke Divinity School. And are the students back, by the way, back from Atlanta with
No, our students are they are still at the Proctor conference.
At the Proctor conference.
They'll be back. They'll be back later on today, I believe. Some have come back last night, I think, but most of them will be back later on today.
Let's take a few minutes about the future of theological education in the context that you taught at Duke and now you're here in New Haven and you're a worldwide speaker. But let me get to the point. The rumor has it that a colleague of yours, a fellow soldier, a fellow warrior is joining the ranks here in New Haven in terms of Reverend Barber. Talk a little bit about the anticipated impact, the desire, the vision, why that's critical, whether it's and I'll be secular driven here, whether it's just a market approach to increase the prominence of the Divinity School, or is it something that really has ramifications beyond the existence of 409 prospect?
Well, listen, we are extremely excited here at Yale Divinity School to be having Reverend William Barber joining us and heading up a beautiful initiative, a Center for Public Theology and Public Policy. And it is so exciting because it is in such continuity with what we want to be about at the Divinity School. And that's this, Tom. I mean, what we do two things well here. The one is that we educate next generation of leaders. And we want to do that by putting at the very center of their formation a moral vision for whatever they're going to do. So if they're going to stay within the religious fields, wonderful. We want a moral vision that drives that. But also for anyone else in the university who is serious about a vocational identity that has a moral compass driving it, and not simply a kind of economic calculation driving their vocational identity. And so by having William Barber come, who is world renowned for doing precisely what I just said, of inviting people to do their living, do their work, and form public policies that help people, especially the poor, driven by a moral vision and not by the things we've been talking about today. That's at the heart of his work. You know, his celebrated work in North Carolina with the NAACP, his celebrated National Poor People's Campaign movement. All of this is so important for us in terms of creating the next generation of people who take seriously what it means to be not simply good citizens, but people who work toward the good in everything they do. So having him here is going to be exciting. What our hope and our prayer is that with the center being here, with the faculty who are already here at the Divinity School and colleagues across the university, what we want to do is to create an opportunity for students across the university to come and engage in learning public theology, thinking about what it means to have a moral compass driving my work, and how that will translate into public policy, both public policy in terms of what governments do and create, but public policy in terms of the way we do all our work, no matter what our field of endeavor, with a view toward the good, the common good of the public, with a special focus on the poor in this country and around the world, the special focus on those whose voices are not at the table, and to challenge the ways in which the poor are ignored continuously in the Western world, and the ways in which the poor are manipulated to walk inside the continuing racial antagonism of not only this country, but of the Western world. So we're excited about having Billy Barber here. He is an ordained clergy and a brilliant scholar. And we already have incredible energy, enthusiasm across the university, beginning with our president and provost, about having him here and having his team here. And so that's going to be incredible.
When you, and just for, I appreciate your sharing that clarification. Are you comfortable in mentioning that you first met that esteemed gentleman before you two became celebs?
Billy Barber and I go back to the 1980s, man. I met him. He and I first met when I was coming to Duke to do my PhD, and he was there doing an MDiv. And we met after a chapel service. He met me and my then newly married wife. She was my bride, and so we have been close family friends for decades. I'm godfather to his children, and he's a dear friend. And then later on, when I became a faculty person, he sat in some of my classes, and so we go way back. And from the very beginning, when you meet someone who you know is going to do good work, because you sense the deep, we talked about this earlier, the deep spiritual and intellectual integrity that drives the person, and the way in which those two things are woven inextricably.
Mm-hmm.
Meet someone like that, you know this person is going to do great work, because they can't do anything else other than do great work, because this is who they are. And so with William Barber, what you see on stage, what you see when he's being interviewed, that is exactly who that man is. Excellent. So we go way back. We go way back.
we have about 5 more minutes. Let's kind of conclude for this particular episode. And as I say, I've already publicly twisted your arm to come back at some point. And I want to give you 3 or 4 more minutes to kind of talk about. You mentioned the word spiritual discipline, but spiritual opportunity. What kind of advice, suggestions would you share with people for them to be alert, to be aware, to be open to spiritual guidance, whether it's this sickness or illness or challenges or stress? Just what are your thoughts about understanding that the spirit energy is always available?
This is a great question. So I especially in this moment, I encourage people, and let's come back to the thing we talked about earlier in terms of hope, to step into the discipline of hope. And for those of us who are Christian, we know what that means. It means that the way in which we understand our daily life has to be captured inside our life with God. I tell my students all the time that what the life of Jesus brought us into was a life that's lived each day between invocation and benediction. And so we understand that we are inside of a story, that each day there is invocation, the calling of God to guide us. And at the end of the day, benediction. In between invocation and benediction, there is what I call the joy of the repetition, the joy of turning my daily struggles, my daily challenges toward a centering, listening to what the Spirit of God is saying to me. And I think it is so important, especially as we are still inside the wounding of this pandemic and all that it has unleashed on us, that it is crucially important for people to understand their lives inside the daily repetition with God. And for those of us who are Christian, inside the work that Jesus has made possible of seeing ourselves inside daily invocation, daily conviction. That's what I'm encouraging people to do these days. We live inside the story of God, though. And for so many people, especially those who are Christian, they have not yet fully realized what that means, that you are inside the work of God. And so the question is, this may be the last thing I'll say today, the question is, how are you yielding to the Spirit of God working in and around you? I have found in my time that the most important question when in relationship to God is not what does God want, or even what is God doing. The most important question is, are we yielding to what God is saying to us? And that is the question I want your listeners to meditate upon.
Well, Harry, we're going to end. We'll end. I have one more follow-up, but I'll say that for our next conversation. But yeah, we need to hit the punctuation mark right there. That's a good conclusion. Reverend, I hope to see you perhaps this evening, and just really appreciate your being available to us.
Glad to do so.
And sharing.
Glad to do so. Glad to do so.
Be well.
Understand what black is. The source from which all things come. Security blanket for the stars. Understand what black is. It's not a color, it's the basis of all colors. It is not a complexion, it is a reflection of all complexions called human. And out of this blackness, passion flows like a river. Feelings tell the truth. Song and dance and making you laugh